Happy New Year, everybody! It is a beautiful January day in Mesa, Arizona, and I wanted to show you what I've been working on the past couple of months. And here it is. This is a exotic bird aviary. I've been working on it a lot after school and on the weekends, and I am just so happy with how it's been turning out. So the design for this aviary is structured around this large citrus tree that kind of goes up the center here. It died about 4 or 5 years ago, but it left this amazing skeleton of a tree. So when I was in the planning stages for an aviary this year, I could not pass up the opportunity to kind of use this tree as a starting point and kind of construct the aviary around it. I stripped away all the tiny twigs and left the main trunk and the main branches, and have turned it into this main feature for this aviary. So it's kind of extravagant. It's 10 by 10 by 10, but with the footing that I had to dig around it and the double stack of these blocks, it's almost, it's more than 11 feet high actually at this point. We started out digging the foundation. So I've got my helpers here, my 3 boys, 2, 4, and 6 years old. And as you can imagine, I bet they'll be great help when they're older. Right now it's mostly just kind of a fun experience for them to participate a little bit. Here we are digging the foundation. Then I leveled some blocks. They're 2 high over here, 2 blocks high over here, and they are 1 around this side. Kind of complicated to even all of that out. The blocks are pictured here. We brought them in on a wheelbarrow and kind of had them on standby while we made sure everything was nice and even. We poured some cement in between all of the block to let it kind of sit in there and get everything in nice and solid, by also allowing these anchor bolts. And the cement dried, and we drilled holes into the bottom board to be able to go through the anchor bolts, and so that's kind of holding it down in a way. Next we begin to assemble the wooden panels, which we used pine and fir wood for, which is not ideal, but that's what worked out in our budget. Pine wood and fir wood are subject to deterioration and weathering over time, so we also added an additional step of sealing the wood with this Kilz primer. K-I-L-Z is the brand name. It has antimicrobial properties in it to keep out the bacteria and to kind of seal the wood in general. If you have birds that are prone to chewing, you'll also need to wrap the wood along the inside of the aviary with whatever wire mesh you end up using, so that they don't chew on and ingest any of your primer or paint chemicals. Smaller birds, you may not have to worry about that quite so much, but larger birds that are prone to chewing, you will need to cover the primed wood. The mesh is 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch hardware cloth. We've used this in the past for cockatiels, lovebirds, budgers, budgies, and we'll have similar sized birds this time. Maybe some that are a little larger, but it should work out well for them. The most exciting day for this project was by far when we were finally able to hoist up the walls. We were able to hoist them and attach them together in one day. We had about 3 people working on that. 2 to lift and 1 to steady, and then 2 to steady while 1 drilled. Then we moved on to some maintenance items, such as filling the gaps with mortar underneath, any small gaps to keep the rodents out, wiring around any gaps in the corners to keep out any small birds or pests who would try to get into the aviary. And that just leaves us with the roof. We were going to build the roof panels separately and then sort of hoist it up, but these panels ended up being so heavy we decided just to build the roof in place. So we had 2 people up on ladders holding wood and nailing and drilling. Once the roof was assembled, then there was a lot of solo time for me up on ladders and rafters, painting with the primer to seal the wood, and attaching the hardware cloth, which some I did myself and some I had a second person helping me with that as well. This was definitely not a one-man job. I had a lot of help, especially from my dad coming over multiple times a week for nearly 2 months, sharing his construction expertise and also being a second hand in helping on a lot of these steps. Now more on the interior. I'm going to have a lot of grass-type parakeets, so I wanted it to have an open bottom so that they'd be able to chew through the grass. I know the grass isn't much right now because it's winter, believe it or not, in sunny Arizona. We do get a couple weeks of winter, and so I can't bring any birds out right now. It gets a little bit cold at night, possibly in the upper 20s on a couple of days. So I'll wait a few weeks before we introduce birds into the aviary. So on the inside, it gets pretty hot in the summer. So I had to build this shade structure and shade barrier on the top. It covers a pretty good portion so that there's a lot of shaded areas within their main perches and branches. Also to protect against rain. We don't get a ton of rain. We did get some last night so that they can stay dry. And then I have this other, it's like 2 feet, 2.5 foot wooden barrier that will allow them to stay out of drafts and wind and things like that. Got some rope, if I can reach it, draped up there in a few different places. Okay. I've got multiple feeding stations. I want this to be kind of like a mixed use aviary, so with a variety of birds. So I first of all tried to make it large enough so they would all have places where they can go and feel safe, and then have different feeding stations so they won't argue and fight. And of course I'll have to keep an eye on them, especially at first, to make sure that they're getting their space and their attention that they need away from each other. I do have a couple of these swings. They look smaller than they are. I can't even reach that from here. Oh, I can barely reach it. Okay, so there's that one and that one. If I ever need to do any work in here again, I'll of course bring in a ladder. There's no way I could even jump and touch the ceiling, it's so high up. On this side, this is full west. We've got these apple trees that have been growing for a couple of years. I think over the next 2 years they're really going to leaf out and help to kind of fill in this aviary. I mean this side of the aviary, so they'll have a lot of nice shade on the, oh, this is not west, this is west. So this would be the north side. I do have this side of the aviary pretty much blocked off so they can have some privacy in one spot at least, and I'll probably build some additional smaller perches under this area. So, oh, notice this bow in this wood. That was just one rain, it already caused it to bow. That's why you can see I've used primer to seal all of the wood. I know usually you shouldn't be painting wood that's going to be near birds, so hopefully this primer will fall into a different category. It's really just to seal the wood and keep it from being damaged. They have plenty of places to perch and to chew on and to scratch on, so hopefully that will deter them from going on the sides. What I'm going to do is, if I notice birds starting to peck and chew on the primed wood, I can always wrap some additional hardware cloth around it to just kind of isolate it from their use. I've got the east side exposed. That's when the sun is the least harshest, and we'll be able to see them kind of perch and feed in the morning. We've got a large window on this side of the house. We can view them in the mornings. I've got a lot of plants and vegetation that I've picked up on a clearance sale from the nursery. Nobody's planting this time of year. We're kind of a few weeks away from planting, so they had a lot of last season's plants. and just letting them soak up some sun, and I'll put them back in the garage for the cold nights. So we'll do some planting. We're going to introduce the birds to the aviary, and that'll be later in February. Here's some of our beauties that I want to try out in the aviary. These are English budgies. They are very similar to regular budgies, but way larger. They have the personality traits and the beautiful colors that regular budgies do, but they are more like the size of a cockatiel. They're actually very fantastic. I'm really surprised that they're not more readily available. They really fantastic birds. So they're probably gonna have to wait until they finish nesting. We might have some other little English budgies to add in there. We have these red-fronted yellow turquoisines. So the turquoisines usually have the turquoise color you can see on the face. They have more of that throughout the body, but these ones happen to be a mutation, and they are mostly yellow with a red front. Beautiful birds. The female actually is almost identical, but she has far less red on the front. So that's a trait of the female. I've been trying to get him to nest since last October, but the female was molting, and I think just now she's been in that box for a few days and rarely comes out, so I think they just started sitting on eggs. I peek in there every once in a while, but she's just sitting. I can't really see underneath her. I also have these yellow Fischers that I think are just absolutely gorgeous. This one has a little bit of maybe some splotchy green on the back, but even so I think it's beautiful. And she has paired up with this violet lovebird, violet Fischer lovebird, which I think will make some very interesting lovebird babies. We'll have to see. I think they're kind of young. They're just kind of experimenting with the nesting box. I don't know if they're going to produce anytime soon. I have another pair of the yellows, and they are over here in this area. They're actually both inside the box on 3 little birds that they are currently feeding. Then down here we have these gorgeous but slightly grumpy birds. They're kind of angry at me. I have had to move them 3 different times since I had them last October, just to be accommodating for other birds who have started to nest. So they might be a little too young to nest. They really haven't taken an interest in the box. Also, I don't think their space is large enough. I think they're really going to appreciate the larger aviary space. But they are gorgeous birds. They're scarlet-chested parakeets or grasskeets, or scarlet-chested parrot is another name for them. This one has a beautiful red, if you'll let us see it, beautiful red chest. And the female does not have the red chest, but most of the other colorings she has are the same. I'm hoping it will just be a beautiful, peaceful place for those birds. I hope they can just really enjoy their time in there. And I know I'm going to enjoy my time in the outdoors, just kind of sitting near there, maybe reading. I just love watching the birds play and eat and raise their little families. I just think it's one of the most amazing and beautiful creatures that we have is beautiful, colorful birds, and I'm just really glad to be a part of some of their lives. And I welcome them to this lovely aviary.